good afternoon, living environment. Welcome to our last lesson of the week, our fifth in a row. Congratulations to us. Before we get started today, I do have a couple of announcements to make. The first announcement is that we were going to be moving from a total of 5 lessons a week to a total of 3 lessons a week. We're going to be dropping down in the number of lessons just so it's a little bit easier for people to keep on top of watching all the videos and getting all their other classes balanced and all that. So I will be posting onto our Google Classroom a schedule, an updated schedule for what I plan to do next week. Keep an eye out for that either later today or tomorrow. I plan on finishing the unit today. Right, we only have a little bit more to talk about. And then I anticipate trying to give our first test this week. Not this week, next week. Which would be on Test Wizard and would be timed, and I'll send out an announcement that has all of that information in it. But for today, we're going to keep going where we left off. We're going to talk a little bit today about biodiversity, a little bit about humans and how they impact different environments and different ecosystems, and then we're going to wrap it up with a talk of how the environment bounces back and how one type of ecosystem can change to another. Right. On the screen right now, we can see we're talking about biodiversity. Biodiversity is a thing that we use, a vocab word that we use to talk about how many different types of organisms live in an area. So when we talk about the biodiversity of the forest, right? Like if we talk about the ecosystem with high biodiversity, we're talking about a place that has lots of different types of animals, lots of different species of animals. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? Diversity in the biological aspect of the area. Was the potato famine caused because of low biodiversity? Yes, right? That is one... Actually, was it? That is one theory. I don't know a ton about the potato famine. I think also it was just really bad conditions for growing potatoes that year. I'm not 100% sure, but I could definitely see that being a reason behind it. It's the example that I used here, right? If one type of tree is attacked by a disease, there are other types that can survive. When we talk about human impact a little bit later on, we talk about how humans really, when they make a like farm, they really only plant the same thing over and over again. So if the thing that they happen to plant, right, let's say it was a potato, if all of these are potatoes and they're all the same potato, if there's insects that eat the potatoes, they'll eat the whole crop, right? If they're carrots and there's a disease that affects these carrots, it'll affect the whole crop. When we talk about an ecosystem being stable, we want high biodiversity in an ecosystem to let the ecosystem be more stable. If we have a food web and, right, we looked at it kind of a little bit the other day, if we have a food web where owls have the option to eat mice or frogs or rabbits, the fact that there's this high biodiversity means that if something happens to the mice, the owls are still going to survive because they have other sources of food, right? If we want to look at it in a less morbid way, if we have a high biodiversity and we have pine trees, spruce trees, and birch trees, and oak trees, if we have these 4 different types of trees, and we have birds and squirrels and what other things live? Let's talk about owls again. If we have all these things living in them, if one type of tree gets killed off, there's still 3 others for our ecosystem to remain stable instead of having all of these things live in one tree, and if the type of tree is gone, then all of these things have no home. Right? So having a high biodiversity, having lots of different options really helps make an ecosystem stable. The reason why we're bringing this up and then we're going to directly connect it to humans is because humans really mess up biodiversity when they move into an area. Humans are notorious for making everything the same. Right? Humans will come into an area and they'll plant one type of crop in a field. They'll chase away all of the wolves because they are hunting or hurting the population, right? They'll cut down forests to make more room for their farms or their cities or all of their other buildings. And so they cause a real loss of biodiversity and a decrease in the stability of the ecosystem. Right? By planting one type of crop in a field, they reduce the biodiversity. Instead of a natural forest where we have some trees, some shrubs, some wildflowers, maybe some berries, some grass. Instead of this, which would be natural, humans come along and they take that same plot of land and they say carrots, 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 and more carrots. Right? This is the opposite of biodiversity. Right? They're taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vague categories. I'm sure there's a lot more, right? We can break down trees into 4 or 5 different types of trees, shrubs into 4 or 5 different types of shrubs, right? Taking all this biodiversity and cutting it down into just one thing, or even just 3 or 4 things, but it's still much lower biodiversity than we would have had if it was just the natural order of things. Overhunting, we can talk about overhunting in regards to our food webs and our food chains. If you overhunt all of the deer because you need them for your own food, if you overhunt all of the fish from a river, if you overhunt all of the wolves because they're a nuisance and they keep coming into town, you're messing up the entire food web of that ecosystem. You're really throwing it off, and you're going to cause shifts that you're not expecting. Right now, the number of rabbits is going to go up by a lot because there's nothing to hunt them, or now the number of owls is going to go down because they have no food, right? All these changes because of humans overhunting. Deforestation has obvious drawbacks, right? When we take away the forest to put cities and actually, I shouldn't even have done that. Right, here's a forest. Right, trees and shrubs and wildflowers and grass and homes for animals. Right, whether that's a nest or a burrow or anything, a human comes along and they're going to chop down that entire forest so that they can put down, paved streets. And buildings, right, which is going to then really take away from this natural biodiversity. It's really important for us as humans to try to limit our impact on the environment. It's really important for us to try to leave things the way they are, so that we don't come along and ruin hundreds of thousands of animal lives or plant lives or any other ecosystems thrown into balance, because they're going to need every piece of what they have to continue to grow and thrive. that being said, humans also don't stay in the same place forever, right? We have ghost towns, right? When we think back in time to old mining towns, right? The gold rush. People rush into an area, they settle there for a year, they mine all the gold they can, and the gold runs out, and they leave. They leave everything behind. They destroyed the natural habitats that were there to put up streets and buildings, and they chopped down all of the forests and the things in the area. They dug big giant holes in the ground and mined up all of the gold that was there, and then they left. And they left behind their buildings and their big holes in the ground. And the environment does have the ability to recover, which is what we're going to look at a little bit now, right? Over time, nature will reclaim, right? It will regrow. It will try to go back to this with the trees and the shrubs and the wildflower and the grass. Animals will adapt and they'll use abandoned buildings as homes, right? But we're going to look specifically at a couple of examples of ecological succession. Right? Ecological succession is the phrase that we use to talk about either one of two things, right? First is the natural order returning after humans have left, or after damage / humans. And two, a natural evolution or change due to outside factors. Right, so the abandoned mining town that was, reclaimed after everybody left versus some natural changes, right? If the temperature changes or if there's more water or less water in an area, how is the ecosystem going to adapt and change? It's not going to stay a rainforest if the rain stops, right? It's not going to stay a desert if a flood comes along, right? Those natural changes is what we're going to talk about for ecological succession, right? And it's natural over time, and it's a constant replacement, right? Slowly rebuilding the ecosystem one piece at a time. Right? There are two examples that we're going to look at. We're going to look at just two examples. There are more, but there are two important ones that we're going to focus on. Right, the first of these that we're going to look at is the idea of bare rock becoming a forest. It's not a great diagram because I made it myself with clip art shapes, but it is going to show our path from just a field of bare rocks, and then slowly over time, lichen, which is what we have here, right? Mosses are going to grow on the rocks. They're going to break down the rocks, slowly making dirt. There's going to be enough dirt that eventually grasses can grow, and the roots of the grass is going to break up the rock a little bit more, making a little bit more dirt. As those grasses die out, then little shrubs can form, little bushes that again, their roots are going to go into those rocks, break it up, and oh, is my mic still not loud? Sorry. How about that? Is that a little bit better? Also, try turning up your volume as well. All right. So, Sorry about that. I'm gonna get as loud as I can without trying to blow out everybody's eardrums, right? So here, we're looking at the succession, right? We have a field of bare rock. Over time, each of the plants that are growing here, right, the lichen, the moss, is gonna slowly break down the rock enough for that, breaking it down enough that there's a little bit of soil for grass to grow. The grass is going to grow, the roots of the grass are going to break down the rock a little bit more, enough for the roots of a shrub to grow. And the roots of the shrub are going to break it up a little bit more, allowing for small trees, and then bigger trees, bigger trees, bigger trees. And at the end of it, we end up with just a forest, right? We've taken all of this rock and we've broken down all of the rock and made soil from it. Right? This is exactly what I was just saying, right? The lichen breaks down the rock, making more soil. The grass and the weeds start to grow. They break down more of the rock. The shrubs grow. They outcompete the sunlight. They outcompete the grass and the weeds for the sunlight, killing the grass and the weeds. The shrubs are taking their place. Right, one thing coming to replace the next, right? The grass replaces the lichen, kills the lichen. The shrubs replace the grass, kills the grass. The pines replace the shrubs, kill the shrubs. The beech and maple trees grow and outshade the pines, right? It's an ecological succession, one thing after the next. So a forest can start from just some rocks. This is a process that takes an insanely long time. But yeah, that is the idea, is that starting from just rocks, we can end up with a forest at the end. Right, it's not like that each of these steps takes a couple of days. It's like each of these steps takes a couple of decades. Right, we're looking at a long-term reclaiming or long-term change from one thing to another. Questions, comments, concerns? Alright, so we have one more example of ecological succession to look at. And that example is a lake becoming a forest. Right? You can have a lake that slowly over time shifts into becoming a forest. As the plants and fish from the lake start to die out, they create nice fertile soil on the bottom of the lake, allowing for more plants to grow, allowing for more fishes to exist. And when those die out, there's a new layer of very fertile soil. And again, allowing for more plants to grow, more fish to live, until that cycle happens over and over and over again. We become a swamp and then a forest. And again, this is not going to happen over the course of 2 years. This is going to take a really, really long time. Right, but we go from lake to swamp to grassland to forest. It really depends how long this takes. Really depends on the rate at which the animals are living and dying. If there's a temperature change that throws it off, or if there's a amount of oxygen in the water that gets taken away, it can happen faster or slower. But usually would say a couple of decades. Right, so like anywhere from 50 to 80 years. And then in terms of explanation for this, the sediments from the broken rocks, remains from dead organisms, start to fill the bottom of the lake. Right, that's really fertile soil that they're putting in there. Right, so it's easy for more plants to then grow from it and repeat this process. And then once the swamp gets filled, right, once it becomes shallow and shallower and shallower and shallower, it starts to get, right, grasses and small trees and then bigger trees, and it ends up as a forest. Right, it's a slow progression, but it is a natural progression from one to the next. And that actually wraps up our ecology unit. And I got a whole lot of nothing left after that. My plan moving forward, just so we have an idea, my plan moving forward is to have next week, instead of a lesson or any lessons, it will be practice problems that I do live for you, and then again transition into office hours. And I'm thinking of a test next week, but again, I'm not sure, and we'll check our emails just to make sure that we're on top of all the information for that. Carter asks where the seeds come from. So if we're looking here from a lake becoming a forest, the seeds really either come in on the wind, right? They get blown in, or they come from the plants that have died, right? So these plants are going to produce seeds to grow new plants, and the same thing for all of this, right? As these plants die out, they're not just going to die, they're going to reach maturity, have their seeds, and then die out. And then as we get different types of plants, those different types of plants are either brought along by visitors to the lake, right? So either animals coming along for a drink have seeds or pollen on them that they then drop off as they bathe or drink from the lake, or they're coming along on the wind, being blown there. Atticus asks what days lessons will be. When we have lessons, right? I said I was going to limit us down to 3, so we're going to go from 1 a day down to 3. It's going to change depending on the week. I anticipate next week, I'm thinking Monday, then Wednesday, then Friday. But if we're still doing home remote learning, after the spring break, then sometimes it'll be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. I'll vary it so that we can have the most attendance at the lessons as possible. I'm going to try to make it work best around the schedule for us as a class, right? Like, what days are we going to need to do things? When are homeworks due? When are tests going to happen? Things like that. Right. If you have any more questions about that, hang on for a second. I'm going to transition us into office hours, and you can ask any questions you have about just general things in a second. So I'm going to end this stream, the last biodiversity lesson, the last ecology lesson, and I'll see you all in office hours.